And I see this with students all the time. They're just like, oh, I hate my playing. I'm doing everything right? I'm playing lines that work over these chords, but I'm just bored, and I get to the end of my solo and I don't even remember anything I played.
That's Will Vincent, an incredible saxophonist who's about to share with us some amazing musical insights. Please enjoy our conversation. Will Vincent, great to meet you and great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel like I know you already, Jay, even though this is the first time we met.
Oh, wow. That's great. Have you watched some of my videos? Is that why?
I've watched some of your videos. I've watched you talking to, most of my friends.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have lots of great saxophone players come and chat with me here. It was Ben Wendell who put us in touch.
That's right.
And I love Ben. And we've had Ben on Better Sax several times now. He's such a thoughtful, everyone's going to say this. He's such a nice guy. He really super nice guy, but he's so thoughtful as a person and a musician. So it's always great to have him. So
sometimes I wish he wasn't so nice. You know what I mean? There needs to be something. There needs to be something wrong with this guy.
A flaw, right? He has to have a flaw somewhere. Yeah. Well, I've always said that Ben has just like the perfect hair. Like if we had a competition for best saxophonist hair, he'd just win every year.
Yeah, don't get me started on the teeth either.
We could just make this whole interview about talking about Ben Wendell. So you are, you're British. Where are you right now?
Well, I'm in London, so I am British. I'm also American. I spent practically all of my adult life in New York. Just recently moved here with my family. My wife is also a musician. She's the head of the jazz program at the Guildhall School of Music here in London. And so yeah, so we're.
Did you go to music school in England?
No, I did like a sort of, I guess you could call it like a liberal arts equivalent degree, and then I went to Manhattan School of Music in 1999, last century.
Last century, I love it. It's interesting because when you mentioned Guildhall, I actually did a exchange program at the Birmingham Conservatoire.
Oh, okay. Right.
And then many of my friends from there, well, some of my friends from there did end up going to Guildhall. And so I've actually been there way back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? What's always extremely interesting to me is, and I think everyone watching, is the stories, your personal story, how you got into saxophone playing, how you kind of did how you came up, how you learned, and how you built your career. And then we can kind of get into the things you're doing these days.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I feel like in saxophone playing, particularly in jazz, everybody sort of has like a kind of accidental route into this world. It's, unless you come from a really musical family of like professionals, and of course, like I have friends in New York who come from sort of jazz dynasties in a way, so it's sort of kind of inevitable that they would at least have the opportunity to do what they do. Most of the other people that I know, it's sort of just like there was one teacher or one record or something that was in the house that just sort of made something click, and then the rest is history for them. You know what I mean? So and that's the way it went for me. So my dad was an amateur pianist. He was a scientist, but he loved to play the piano, and he had some jazz records, and they were sort of of a certain generation, or maybe like even slightly eclectic. Like he loved Ellington, and so I had a really early kind of introduction to Ben Webster and and Harry Carney and Lester Young and that world. And then he was also into like Oscar Peterson and really sort of virtuosic piano stuff, which also gave me like a when you hear that stuff for the first time, especially if you're taking piano lessons, and you're working really hard at putting the hands together, and then you hear like Oscar Peterson. And growing up in London, I got to go and actually see these people because I'm just old enough that they were still around and playing when I was growing up. It just sort of it just blows everything apart. And at some point, well, actually, okay, so I mentioned for a lot of people there's one teacher, and for me that was the case. I was having classical piano lessons, and I was really I was bored, and I loved the sound of the saxophone, and I got my parents to rent me a saxophone, but there weren't really any saxophone teachers. And then finally my parents found me a jazz piano teacher, which, like, I didn't think that was a thing that even existed. And his name was Leon Cohen. He's still alive. He's almost 100, and he still has this like amazing childlike enthusiasm that I wish at my age I wish I had what he has at nearly 100. But and he just ignited my sort of interest in all this stuff that you can get into in music, that doesn't matter what instrument you play, the harmony and time and rhythm and tunes and all that stuff. And then by studying with him, my saxophone playing sort of came alive. You know what I mean? Because I was getting this input from somebody that was bigger than any one instrument. So the combination of those couple of things, my dad's records, like a handful of sort of almost random records, and then this guy Leon, who just sort of like lit a fuse in my brain, is what got me started.
Okay, so what age are we talking about here?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably like 10 or 12, maybe. And then I started playing, I started working on a lot of stuff alone. Like, I was kind of a shy kid, and then even though I was growing up in a big city, it wasn't like clear to me how I could get involved with other people. So I spent a lot of time working on my own, and then I gradually started to come out of my shell and play with people, and I would play in like funk bands and R&B bands and stuff like that, because there
This
weren't
is
a
as
lot of
a teenager?
what's that? Yeah, like I'm sort of mid-teens, like 15, 16. And then I started to discover that actually, like for a shy kid, like playing the saxophone and fronting a band was actually quite a good way to, come out of yourself and make people interested in you. So that was pretty cool. And then that evolved, and I went to college, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. And then I met a bass player um, at college in a city called Bristol here in the UK, and he had just finished or undergrad or something at Manhattan School of Music, and he was telling me about it, and I just never in a million years dreamed that I would go to New York at this point. Okay, so I'm going to age myself now. I used to go to Ronnie Scott's, which is a great club in London, and in those days, like with my fake student ID that made it look like I was 18, I could get into Ronnie Scott's for £2. That's like $3 a night, and stay the whole night. And I would go. I saw like James Moody. I saw Steve Grossman. I saw Michael Brecker. All these guys for $3. And I used to go like basically whenever my parents would let me. And so I checked out all this music, and I could tell then that there was something special about New York, because the way that these guys played was different from the way that there's a lot of great musicians here in London, but it's a different thing, right? And then this other fuse was lit in my mind, like maybe I got to go to New York. And it's funny because I think I wasn't ready. Like a lot of people aren't ready when they go to New York, but I didn't know I wasn't ready. And I think if I'd known like what it meant to go and land yourself in New York, I probably would have been too nervous to do it. But I was just gung ho, and like I was a kid, and I had chops, and I thought, wow, man, I'm gonna come and just whatever, have some kind of impact. And I went to New York, and I was like, okay, Rude Awakening, this is the real deal. And then yeah, I mean, I
Well,
remember.
can we talk about so when you say rude awakening, like maybe you could talk about that, what that felt like, and maybe some early experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like when you're learning to play the music and you're copying records, you're transcribing, you're trying to learn as much as you can, and you're playing in an environment where there aren't a lot of like high level jazz musicians around you. You sort of only have your own, almost like how can I put it, like a sort of two-dimensional understanding of the records that you're hearing, and then you have the sound that you make when you play the instrument, right? And those are sort of your own only references, and you can do what you can do what you can to try to make yourself feel like you're sounding like those records, right? But then you come and land in like the living, breathing heart of the music in New York, and suddenly it's like suddenly three-dimensional, and all this stuff is coming at you, and you're being thrown into situations where it's like, oh, I'm not just playing along with this record that I've heard a million times now. I'm having to interact and adapt and react to to really dynamic and kinetic music that's happening around me, and it's like, oh, this is going to take another skill set, right? It's like, this is not something I can learn in my bedroom. So because I arrived and I had chops, right? I could play the horn, I knew tunes, I had, you know I could play changes, all that stuff, that I had a decent sound, all the stuff that you need. But then there's just something that just wallops you when you get there, and you're in this environment where it's not just that the level is high, it's just there's so many people at that level, right? And it's really overwhelming and magical, like, because there's no bigger sort of kick in the butt that you can get than that. So that was really sort of defining for me.
And so
Um,
that kind of made you want to move forward rather than want to give up.
oh yeah, well, you sort of have a choice, don't you? I remember going to see, like, there were certain musicians that I grew up with, going to see, like, I think I went to see the Brecker Brothers with my friend, and who was a drummer, and Dennis Chambers was in the band. And it was like bananas. We both just had our brains melted by this stuff. And he said to me afterwards, I don't think he really meant this, but like his initial impulse was like, oh man, I got to give up. And I was like, I want to do what they can do, right? And that doesn't happen by giving up. I mean, of course, you feel like that sometimes. You hit walls all the time, but once you've had the experience of like breaking through a wall, then you know that no matter how like impenetrable the next one feels or looks, you know that there's going to be like a little crack that you can find in there, and you can find your way through. So and what's amazing, of course, is like, here I am like 20, 30 years later, and I'm still just as inspired by the same people, and also people younger than me. And it's just like all these new, what maybe a younger me would have seen as like walls appearing, but instead it's like, oh well, I've got to, you know I can just get a foothold in there and climb it, and try to work out how this works, and what I can take from the music that I'm hearing, because ultimately that's where, especially in jazz music, which is what I play, that's where it comes from. It comes from hearing stuff that you haven't heard before, and then trying to get a piece of it.
I would be very interested to hear when you talk about, breaking through these barriers and these walls.
Mm.
Is this something that you find, on a scale of 1 to, impossible? Like, what is the difficulty level there? When you would make these different breakthroughs, did it take years? Did it take months? Was it less difficult than you thought?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is yes to all of those. Like, sometimes it wouldn't take that long because it's just a thing that you hadn't thought of that someone's doing. And then there are other times when it's like a whole lifetime's work. I mean, the two things that I'm most inspired by are, and that I most kind of feel as limitations as a saxophone player, are things that other people can do, right? So the way that pianists use harmony and the way that rhythm section players use time, like those are the things that sort of the biggest present the biggest number of obstacles for saxophone players, right? Because we're not, we first of all we can only play one note at a time, and we're not rhythm section players, so we don't have sort of the same kind of role and the way that influences your practice and stuff that the rhythm section players have. So I've I'm blown away by saxophone players, don't get me wrong, but I'm most kind of like prodded to learn new things by people who play different instruments, because I hear what people are doing with the elements that they have, and I'm just like, how can I try to get some of that on my instrument? You know what I mean? So the two biggest things, time and harmony, are a lifelong project that I will never complete.
Right, because so some of these challenges, they're ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they just, maybe you get to the next level and then you realize, oh, there's another level
Yeah,
to beat.
but
And then
you
it
also
just
don't
never ends.
realize when you've got to the next level, right? Because you as a like a hungry musician, you're always interested in what you don't have, right? It's sort of like a toddler in a way. When my daughter, if I tell my daughter she can have like a chocolate chip cookie, she's always thinking like, I wish I could have 2 chocolate chip cookies, and it's the same as a musician. You see this thing and you start to work, you think, oh, all my prayers would be answered if I could do this one thing that I've heard somebody do. And then you work on it and you sort of get to a point without really even realizing where you kind of can do that, but you're not thinking about that anymore. You're thinking about the other thing that the other guy can do that you
You're
can.
already bored with the
Right?
thing that was your dream to be able to do. No,
Exactly.
now I'm
And
bored.
it's
I've
the way
already
it should
played
be,
it in a solo. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Yeah. My God, that's my life.
Isn't that silly when we put that in perspective? But so I wonder, it's interesting the repercussions that can have on musicians and their development. Like it can, it's an interesting point for maybe an entirely separate discussion. But there are musicians that kind of established their playing style and their vocabulary and their language and stuck with that for decades, and it was not a ton of evolution after that.
Hmm.
And then there are other musicians that, this year they're playing this way, the next year they're playing this way, and it was a continuous evolution.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure that comes down to personality and a lot of factors, but I find that very interesting. And then I also find that then there's, contemporary musicians who were listening to all these different references and these different people, and some choose one path or the other. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And how would you where would you put yourself in that sort of continuum of?
Well, I think we are sort of often the least well equipped to judge our own position, you know what I mean? But I can tell you about what my what my goal is in that sort of continuum. And that is, it's an evolutionary one, right? It's not, I don't want to reinvent myself in terms of like, stylistically or anything like that, because okay, so like maybe the best example of someone who reinvents themselves and change and sounds totally different, or their music sounds totally different from one year to the next, is Miles Davis, right? But the thing is, like through the middle of that music, whatever it is, you're still hearing Miles, right? And you're hearing the same you're not hearing the same phrases, but you're hearing the same approach to phrasing. You're hearing the same, you know, sort of, you can sort of hear the care that he has about his sound and all of those things. That it's always him, even though what around him is changing. So sometimes the reinvention thing, I don't want to say it's superficial, but it's like it's one flavor of what's happening. You know what I mean? I would be kind of suspicious of somebody who's actual playing completely transforms from one year to the next. And well, maybe not suspicious. This is all hypothetical. If you show me somebody that I should be listening to who does that, that's a different question. But for me, like I sort of have a direction. It has to do with just my proclivities. It has to do with the music that interests me. It has to do with like little sort of puzzles I have in my brain that I'm still kind of working on. Like, I never worked out how to do a Rubik's Cube, and I feel,
I learned how to do that. I bought a Rubik's Cube for my daughter.
Yeah.
And she never wasn't interested in it. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I thought, this is a nice little activity to do, when you've downtime, instead of picking up the phone and scrolling, take the Rubik's Cube and do it. And with YouTube, you could just watch a video, learn how to do it. It took me, a couple days I memorized all the patterns, and now I can do it. And it's a great little exercise for someone, when you say you have puzzles in your brain, you like to work out. I sit down, and if I want to have some analog time, I can pick that thing up.
Yeah.
Do it. It's fantastic.
Well, now you need to watch the YouTube video of the kid from Bolivia, I think it is, who's juggling 3 Rubik's Cubes and solving them at the same time.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, maybe that's your next level. I still haven't done the original one. We're talking about trajectory, I guess, the way that you see the way that I see my music evolving. When you're young, like you feel like you've got forever, right, to work on stuff, so you can really dig into some stuff. Then you get a little bit older and you realize, okay, there is a time limit on this, right? I'm not, and my trajectory has been a sort of fairly consistent one. And do I feel like I'm any closer to what my goal was at the beginning? Yes, but I also feel that the goal has moved, right? So there's no limit to how long I can go on my current trajectory of like focusing on certain things, particularly harmony and time, but others too. But I don't have any great. I mean, okay, so I might try sort of different stylistic projects. Like currently I'm working on a big band project of some of my music, and I've done stuff in the past where I've arranged for strings and had that on my records and stuff like that. Like, to me, palette is something that I can change up really easily and still kind of be myself, right? And every time I do that, like I'll hear something in the new environment that I find myself in that maybe like rings a little bell and points me in some other direction that I can take my playing. But none of it's really that dramatic. I'm still trying to work out how to do the things that I've been trying to work out, my whole life. So that's, yeah, I mean, I don't know where that puts me, because I don't think that, I think it's not like I've found my thing, right? And I'm just going to do that thing. Like, if you have a really strong thing that doesn't sound like anyone else, and then people like it, I can totally understand the temptation that you might have to just like keep doing that, because apart from anything else, that's what people want to hear when they come and see you, right? I try to think of a sort of ridiculous example, but if you, whatever, let's just take names out of it. But if you're somebody who's known for like really hard hitting, shredding, like power drill saxophone playing, and then people show up and you're going through your sort of like, Paul Desmond phase or something, then they might be disappointed. I'm lucky because I'm not like super associated with one really specific thing. So I feel like I can kind of, I can change my approach from show to show or band to band, or just alter it a little bit, change like the sort of settings, right? That I'm, maybe I'll lean a little bit more into sound here. Maybe I'll lean a bit harder into, space or whatever.
It's interesting because I was listening to your latest album, and I was, I'm listening, I'm like, oh, I was, I don't want to use the word surprise, but that's the word that comes into my head, at how eclectic it is how you're kind of really exploring a lot of different material and directions in one album.
I have to connect. Can I ask which album? Just because it.
I think what's the latest one? What is the latest one called?
Well, it might be Urban Myth.
It's the one, the first track you're playing. It's like there's a few tracks where you have like pedals,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It'll be Urban Myth. Yeah.
and the first one has pedals. So it's like, oh, this is cool, you know. And then it goes into a different direction. I'm like, oh, okay, this is cool. It's very different, but it's very cool. And then, you know, so there was just like this progression. And then like later on, it was back to the pedals. I'm like, okay, this is cool, you know. And but it all worked as well, and that's a bit of a challenge too. And I guess that I wonder when you do something like that, are you concerned? Are you saying, "Oh, I wonder if I can get away with making an album that's kind of exploring different things"?
Well, so the answer to that is that I think as long as there's some kind of unity running through the whole thing, then the answer is yes, right? And actually, the answer is like yes, please, because you know if it, certainly when I was younger, and I see this with young players all the time, and it's completely human. There's a real sort of sense of urgency about the way that people play sometimes that manifests in feeling like they have to show you everything that they can do in every solo that they play or every tune that they play. And the problem with that is that after one tune, the audience has now heard everything that you can do. So what are you going to do in the next tune? Right?
Yeah.
You're going to do it again, and that and that's cool too. And honestly, if you're really good, and if the energy is there, and if the playing is sincere and everything, like that's cool. But if you're making a record, I think there is a difference between a live show and a record here, but the same does apply to a live show. You know, you've got your personality is not two-dimensional, one-dimensional. And so the music and the concert and the record shouldn't be either, right? Like, you know, I love playing, you know, so that band, for example, with Gilad Hexerman on guitar and Nate Wood on bass and drums, and I'm also playing keyboards on that in that band. Like, we love to rock out, right? We love to play really loud and shred and all that stuff. I am an unapologetic believer in the idea that there's nothing wrong with shredding, as long as it's not the beginning and the end of everything that you're doing, right? So, so we have tunes like that where we can just like, you know, no holds barred, just like do that, and then the next tune might be a ballad that's completely rubato, and we're just exploring space and reverb and sounds and harmony and all of that. And the thing is, you need to give yourself that space, right? Instead of like the alternative, which is like in every tune, sort of shred a bit and then think, oh, I'm overdoing it here. Maybe I'll. and then you know you got to. My attitude to all this stuff is like it needs to be what it is, right? So if I'm playing a tune that's like just gung ho, shred fest, then lean in, and then that sort of gives me permission in a way to follow that up with something that is like ethereal and space based, and I can really explore that, knowing that on the next tune I've got the opportunity to do something in between or whatever, right? But the first point that I made, my first reaction, I think is key too, which is that there has to be some unity to the whole thing.
No, I was when you brought this up, it made me think of Baptiste Herbin. Do you know Baptiste? I mean, he is a total.
Continue or different. Baptiste.
Baptiste Herbin, the French, amazing virtuoso saxophonist, and he was here, and I went to a concert that he played, and then later he came by, and we were talking about this. And because when he does these shows, you know, he can shred, and he has a lot of. Well, he's got his vocabulary, and he's got his things, you know, his tricks, and he's like, and I mentioned to him, throughout the concert, you know, you did on this tune, you did this amazing thing, and on this tune, you did this amazing thing, and then you did this amazing thing. And he's like, yeah, I have to be very careful, and I plan out, and the same thing with the albums. I can't do that trick, every tune, or else people are going to be bored. I gotta bring everything out once during the show, otherwise it's not impressive if you do it twice. So I was like, oh, and he's saying when I make the albums, same thing. Like everything kind of has to be. We can't just put it all out in the first tune. Otherwise,
Mhm.
what's the point of listening to the rest?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And if you think about it, like, you know, in other types of music, I think people are a little bit, excuse me, in other types of music, whether it's classical music or pop music or whatever, people are a little bit more conscious of that, I think, because I don't know, because they have the time to sort of create something, and it's not so much about like the virtuosity of the individual, which jazz often is, whether we really like to think of it that way or not. And so it's more about creating a mood, portraying an emotion, whatever. And some of that gets lost when you're just when the goal of performing is like, look at what I can do. Right. Because, it's cool because jazz musicians, saxophone players can do lots of stuff, and it is exciting, and it still gets me going, and I love it, and I love hearing people do their thing. But that's only one element of music, isn't it? Let's face it. Like, check me out. You know what I mean? It's limited. So if you go into like every tune with that impulse, then yeah, people will get bored.
So I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit more about. So you sent me this book. This is your new book, Sideways.
That's the one.
A horizontal concept of harmony for the jazz soloist. Well, I love the artwork. It's kind of a. Well, tell me about the artwork on that.
Okay, so the artwork was done by, okay, so I had a concept of what I wanted it to look like, which maybe will make sense when I tell you what it's about. But I was trying to find some graphic designers or artists to do something that would portray this thing, and I was being very specific about it. And the people that I spoke to were having a lot of trouble. And I had somebody come back with something that they were very proud of, and I just felt so bad because I was like, you're sort of doing what I asked you to do, but this is absolutely the opposite of what I wanted. And then I just remembered, how things just slip your mind, right? I just remembered Jamie Brewick, who has a company called B-Side Graphics, who does the Trio Grande album covers. So the album that you're talking about, Urban Myth, and we have another record just called Trio Grande. And he's also got a significant part of his business is in designing flyers for people. He's really good at generating a sort of like 1960s style Blue Note type look to right. his flyers.
That was the look I was,
right. And so I remembered him. Actually, it was Ben reminded me of him because he designed Ben's covers too. And I emailed him, having spent 6 weeks trying to get something, just trying to get the beginnings of something here. I emailed him, and like an hour later, he came back at me with this, and I was like, "Okay, that's that." Wow. I don't even, I don't know how his mind works, because I've worked with him with different things before. But I give him a title, and he just produces something that I would never have thought of, and it's always beautiful. And it does have, it's definitely influenced by that sort of retro style, but it's more than that too. He's amazing. So I don't want to plug him too much because I still want him to be available for my
Well, it is just, it's when you have a cover like that, and Ben's covers are great. I mean, it does say something about um, the roots of, what's your roots, your
Mhm.
cultural roots, let's say. So I got into this book, um, and I went through it in, like a first pass, just kind of, I wanted to know what was going on before we spoke, so I
Mm.
can understand it. But I by no means have spent the practice time it would be required to really.
Neither have I.
Well, so it's great. I love the concept. I was hoping that maybe you could take your saxophone out and kind of show us a little bit of like how it works.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Maybe I should just talk a little bit about what
Yeah.
the concept is. So I already mentioned that you know, for me, like the things that I care most about working on, or the things that are like just forever projects, are things that like people who aren't saxophone players can do or are really good at. And what I mean, the first thing that really hit me when I got to New York was like rhythm sections and time and all my limitations there. But then very quickly another one became harmony. Now, partly it's because I do play piano. I'm not a great pianist, but I play piano, and so I'm already feeling a certain sense of frustration when I play the saxophone that I'm not able to do, all the stuff that I can do when I play piano. But the inspiration for this concept sort of comes from a kind of envy that I had of pianists and guitarists and composers. Like in their hands, harmony is like a living, breathing thing, right? It's part of their improvisation. They're improvising with it. They're not just playing stuff on top of it. Um, and I feel like with saxophone players, very often the way that we approach harmony is like it is what it is, and all we can do is like sort of try to do something on top of it, basically. And I looked at piano players, and I just thought, I want a piece of that, right? I want to be able to improvise with harmony. I want the harmony to like evolve with the way that I play it, right? So I wanted my single lines to have some sort of, because all I can do is single lines. I'm not very good at multiphonics. I wanted them to contain some sort of polyphonic element, harmonic element. And the thing is that there are different ways to do that. Like saxophone players very often will kind of mess with the harmony by superimposing something on top of changes, like a sort of chromatic 2/5 or something like that, or whatever it is that you want to do. Maybe just playing over the dominant chord when you have a 2/5, or when you just have a dominant chord playing a 2/5 over it, that kind of thing. But all of that stuff is still coming from the same place, which is what I would describe as like a vertical sense of harmony. Like the chord symbol is the harmony, right? And that chord exists for however long it exists, and then there's a bar line, and then there's another chord, and then you play whatever you can play over that chord. But if you listen to a pianist like some of the people that I've had the pleasure of playing with, like Sullivan Fortner or Gonzalo Rubalcaba, guitarists like Lage Lund, who's a great guitarist that I've played with for a long time, and Gillette Hexaman, they understand that harmony actually isn't a vertical static concept. It is the combination of lines, right? That's what Bach is. If you listen to a Bach chorale, you're not hearing like chord changes with like over the top of it. You're hearing four melodies. And when you sort of understand that, having come from the place that a lot of us come from as saxophone players, that's really kind of mind blowing. You'll hear like you'll be listening to a piece of Bach, and you'll hear a chord, and you'll be like, "Oh my God, what is that chord? That's the most amazing thing I've ever heard." And then you look it up, or you transcribe it, or you look at the score or whatever, and you realize it's like a C major triad. But what's amazing about it is not what it is, but where it's coming from and how it got there, right? So that's wonderful. And there are pianists and guitarists who can kind of make their improvisations over chord progression that already exists, they can make it sound like that's what's happening. Now, how do we do that? Because we've only got one note that we can play at a time, right? So I, just like, working on time requires checking out rhythm section players, working on this stuff or trying to find some way into this stuff, because you're never going to be able to do it at the same level that these guys do it. But it requires looking at what they're doing and trying to understand what they're doing, and then trying to find some ways of practicing what they're doing. So what I do in the book is that I basically give a sort of introduction to voice leading, which is sort of what this is about. But it's not just about voice leading in terms of the top note of the chord or anything like that. It's about, melodies within harmony that create the harmony. And then I try to look at something that I've heard described as implied polyphony, which, if you think about the Bach solo string pieces, like the famous cello suite, for example, you're only hearing one note. I mean, you hear a little bit of resonance because they have 4 strings and everything, but you're only really hearing one note. But the combination or the juxtaposition of those notes leaves the memory of the last note in your mind, and so you're hearing it as polyphony, which is a really magical thing. And then the way that all those individual lines move determines what the harmony it is, not the other way around. That's why I call it sideways, right? Because the harmony is coming from all these melodies moving together, rather than the melody coming from harmony, which just is sort of descends from the sky and like a monolith, and that's all you got to work with.
There was something in the beginning of the book where you're talking about how jazz standards, the Great American Songbook, those tunes that have all been reduced to 2-5-1s, but when they were originally composed, there was much more complexity going on, in those and how they were arranged and orchestrated.
Yeah, I mean, there's more complexity, but sometimes it's not even about complexity. Sometimes it's actually simplicity in a way. Like, for example, the jazz musician, or some jazz musicians, will see, like, the chord is C. So what do they play? They play like a C, a G, an A, a B natural, an F sharp, maybe like a D sharp at the top. It's like all of this color, right, that they'll superimpose over everything. But the weird thing is that, like, when you keep doing that, and all of those chords that you play are just sort of plonking down without any kind of sideways motion between them, you're using all of that color, and it's a bit like what happens when your daughter, or my daughter, I don't know how old your daughter is, takes all the paints in the box and just paints them over each other. There's so much color, but what does it look like? It looks like sludge, right? and harmony can be like that, like when it's being used in that way. But like I say, a C major chord can sound amazing if it's coming out of voicing. So voice leading, I should say. So if you look at some of those original song sheets of Great American Songbook standards, you'll see that actually sometimes the harmony is very simple, but there's just these inner parts moving, and that's what's making the harmony. And it's not complex. It doesn't sound like necessarily that sophisticated, but it's just gorgeous. And so I just, I wanted a piece of that. So in the book, the first thing I try to get people to do is something that sounds very simple, and kind of is simple in the grand scheme of things, compared with all the stuff that most saxophone players can do. It's very simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy, right? Which is to just take a chord progression and just try to play it with good voice leading. Now, and just like limit yourself to triads, and then gradually, like, maybe allow other notes from the chords, and then eventually allow notes that maybe don't even belong to the chord. But the key is that when you're trying to decide what note to play, you're not thinking about it in terms of, like, does this fit on the grid? You're thinking about it in terms of this voice that I have moving, whether maybe I've got 2 voices moving along or 3 voices. where does this voice want to go? And trying to use your ear and trust your ear, and then actually like take risks with those things, because after all, like the improvising jazz is supposed to be about risk taking. So if you approach every chord like, I know what this is, I'm going to play this pattern, it's going to work, and then I can move on to the next one, you're not taking risks. I mean, it can't, don't get me wrong, like I do that as much as anybody else does. It can still sound good, it can be cool, but ultimately you can actually get yourself into a real rut with harmony. And I see this with students all the time. They're just like, oh, I hate my playing. I'm doing everything right. I'm playing lines that work over these chords, but I'm just bored, and I get to the end of my solo and I don't even remember anything I played, right? And I found that with working with some of these things, that I can, it's one of the things that it's doing is that it's slowing me down, because I'm really having to listen to myself. And that's something that I think we often don't do. We don't really listen to ourselves. It's all like output. Everybody knows that saxophone players like have a hard. I can say this because we're amongst friends, right? Like nobody, it's only saxophone players listening. I'm going to tell you a secret, guys. Everybody knows that saxophone players are often not that great at listening to the rest of the band, right? But charity begins at home, right? You start by listening to yourself. Listen to the notes that you're playing. Allow yourself some space so you can really hear them. And when you do that, even if you're just playing with like two lines, juxtaposing two lines, then you can start to hear where they need to go, where they want to go. Or you could be like, okay, what if this one goes here? It's not in the chord, but what will happen to the sound of the harmony? And the answer is, who knows? Like, find out, right? So, does that make sense, Jay?
Well, it makes sense. It makes sense to me because I've, already read
Mm-hmm.
the book and worked on some of the stuff. I think that might, and that's a concept that not everyone, it depends on what stage you are in your journey with improvisation,
Mm-hmm.
how much sense that's going to make to
Yeah.
each individual, I think.
So my belief about this method, and that like the method isn't perfected, right? I'm showing you in this book like what I've done. My belief about it is that because the concept is simple, you can actually like you stop somebody on the street and you ask them what is harmony, and if they don't just like throw their coffee in your face and run away, like they're probably going to say something like, it's what happens when there's more than one melody, right? People know that, but we often don't really approach it that way. So the concept is very simple. So I mean, like I'm still working on this. I will be working on this stuff forever. I can pretty much guarantee that. But the actual like entry into it is very simple. It's as simple as just like playing through a chord progression and juxtaposing two parts and trying to keep the two parts sort of integral to themselves, right? So you're not trying to, it's not like, oh, I have to play a third and a seventh or anything like that. That's obviously when you're learning a tune, playing those guide tones is really important. But ultimately, it's like, what sound am I making, and what sound, do I want to continue to make here? And so in the book, I detail the exercises that I do, starting at a very, very simple, like triadic level, trying to encourage like a little bit of, just a little bit of melodic thought going into harmony. And then, of course, you can take that as far and as wide as you want. And I end up with, big four note chords and bigger. And I also end up with like embellishments within the lines. And then the key is to like see how those embellishments impact the harmony and the melody, because melody and harmony, if you really, when you really get down to it, they're the same thing, right? Look at that Bach chorale. You've got four parts. You take three of them away. What have you got? Not a bass line, not an inner part. You've got a melody, right? That's really hard to do, but it's so elegant and so beautiful when it happens. And if you listen to those pianists that I mentioned, or like Hank Jones or Barry Harris, these guys are living and breathing that stuff. And So I want a bit of that for myself. You asked me to play something, so I can do that if you like.
I would love for you to just kind of give us a couple snippets. Like, all right, this is what we talk about at the beginning. This is what we talk about a little bit. Then it gets a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Just to hear it. Now that we've had that explanation, a little demonstration would probably help.
So I start by getting people just to take the triads of a tune, and the tune that I lean on really heavily in Sideways is All the Things You Are, because everybody knows it, and also, well, a lot of people know it. If you don't know it, learn it. And because it goes to a lot of different places, so it gives you a lot of opportunity for playing with things. But the first thing I do is just ask people to play through those chords as triads in 3 parts, right? So you're always playing every note of the triad. But what you're trying to do is move each note, each part, these 3 parts, let's call it like alto, tenor, bass, whatever, as little as possible, so that they have a sort of smooth line to them, right? So I might do, I'm going to go top down. Right? It sounds really straightforward.
So you're using, for clarity, you're using different inversions of those triads so that you're minimizing the movement from each of those voices from one chord to the next.
Exactly. Yeah. Really, really like straight down the line voice leading, right? And then I try to move those parts a little further apart from each other. So like what guitarists would call like a drop 2 or drop 3 voicing. So instead of having the notes like right next to each other, I'll have, the 3rd up here and the 5th down here and the root down there, starting like that. But eventually I get to the point where, because I don't want to subject your viewers to all the exercises in the book, but I'll eventually get to a place where I'm juxtaposing 3 parts, but instead of thinking, oh, okay, this is an F minor, I'd better make sure there's a, A flat in it and an E flat or whatever. Instead of that, I'll use that as a starting point. But because I know the tune, and crucially, I know how the tune sounds, right? This is a really important part of playing like Great American Songbook repertoire. It's one thing to know the chord symbols, but because that is very much our method, we tend to think of it in those terms. Okay, I know that the first chord is this, second chord is this. Da, 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 da. We also really need to know what those chords sound like. It's much more important what they sound like than what they look like, right, on the page. So I always, advise people to learn these tunes by ear, and don't worry if you don't have it 100%. It doesn't matter. A lot of your favorite records have players on them that don't know what the changes are 100%, right? And that's part of the reason why they sound so good, because they're looking for sound. They're searching, right?
That's a great point. Now, there are great, what are widely considered great jazz improvisers who reportedly didn't know the chords.
Yeah.
What was it? So Bob Mover told me, I don't want to quote the wrong, but I think he was saying, I can't even remember who he's talking about. It was either Chet Baker or somebody else, but he said, he knows everything about chords except their names.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
and that's the thing. And when you listen to someone like Chet, you're like, wow, because the melody it's always melody. And of course, there's some patterns and some things thrown in there. But sometimes you get, oh, that's not what the person who knows all the chords, the names, would have played there. But maybe that kind of fits into what you're talking about.
But on that precise point, like if you're playing with a rhythm section and the bass player is playing the roots and the piano player is playing the chords, what do you need to play the chords back to them for? They're already there. Of course, yes, in an ideal world, we would all have all the knowledge of everything at all times, and our knowledge in one area wouldn't bias the way that we, think of things in another area. but things aren't like that. I'm not recommending that people don't learn the changes, but what I'm saying is don't learn the changes and then think that now you know the song in its entirety, right? So yeah, that's a beautiful quote. So anyway, so I go through some of this stuff, and then eventually I'm spreading the voices out more, and then I'm starting to embellish them, and then trying to see what that embellishment does to the sound of the chord, right? So I'm still playing All the Things You Are, but it might sound the exercise. This is not a solo, by the way. This is just me trying to navigate the harmony in a different way, so that when I am soloing, this can inform the solo, right? That's an important distinction to make. Like I don't recommend that people go on stage or go to a jam session and play these exercises, right? But it's sort of like a mental exercise. It's also an oral exercise because it's trying to open up your ear to the potential that you can have to change harmony with the way that you play melodically. So I'll just sort of fast forward a few exercises and play something more like this. Right, that's just the first A section of. Excuse me. That's just the first A section of All the Things You Are. But there's a lot of stuff in there that implies stuff that's outside of where the changes are, but it makes sense, or I think it makes sense, because it's coming from a melodic place, right? Now, and then then there's other sort of areas that I play with, which is just once you've practiced all that stuff, and like I say, it's like there's no like arrival point with this stuff. You never get to a point where it's like, okay, done that, I can just apply that to my playing. It's a process. It's a methodology rather than like a than a method, really. So then what I do is I just encourage people to actually play melodies that contain two lines in them, and there's no necessarily rules about how you divide them or anything like that. But what I found is that by practicing this stuff, I became much more keenly aware of like the sense of balance that's in melody. Like when you're playing chord scale stuff through the changes, it can be awesome. But if you're not careful, if you think that that's like the goal and that's all there is, you can end up sort of playing lines where you just sort of start at the bottom of the range of the instrument, just keep going up, and then you're at the top and you just come back down, and then there isn't really a sense of proportion about the melody. If you think about like what a great melody sounds like, it doesn't usually work like that. So I'm going to sort of do some of the same embellishment stuff, which I won't bother describing now, but it's in there with sort of simple juxtaposition of two lines to create a larger melody. So same tune. So I was trying not to stray too far from the harmony there, so that you could still hear the tune. Like, there's just me, there's no piano player. But what I'm trying to do is get to a place where when I'm playing with a rhythm section, I don't feel that way that I did when I got to New York, and I felt like, okay, harmony is their job, and my job is like to play over it. Because apart from anything else, like, what happens when there are some great piano players out there, and some of them sometimes they're like a little bit too great, and they do all this stuff with the harmony, and they're really messing with it. And your understanding of harmony only allows you to play stuff that makes sense over the chord changes as you know them. But you've got this piano player doing some like Messiaen shit, and you're like, well, what do I do now? Well, my goal, which will never be 100% achieved, but my goal is to be in a situation where like they're not the only people that get to do that, right? I want a piece of that. That's that's what it comes down to. So I made a trio record a few years ago, and it's called Tripwire. And if you listen to that, you can sort of hear me starting to put these ideas into practice, because I wanted to get the piano player or the guitarist like out of there so that I could have that space to myself. And you can hear me kind of experimenting with it. But now I like to, what I've found is that these ideas are just as valuable for affecting the way that I play melody as harmony. And I can employ them alongside everything else that I've learned over the years, and use them in a trio context, or a quartet or a quintet or big band or whatever.
Okay, well, again, just for clarity, like for what you just played, and for people who don't know the book yet, and for me too. So you're basically have like one upper melodic line is kind of what's going on in your brain, and another lower melodic line, and you're kind of bouncing back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah. And I actually was a little bit naughty because I added a third one at a certain point. But it's, sometimes I can't help myself. I'm like, I just want that extra cookie.
And that's kind of like after working out all of stuff, all of these things, the exercise in the book, and really understanding the stuff and having spent all the time necessary to get the technical side of it down. The goal is to then be able to use it so that you can have more interesting improvisations. You can go into other directions. And you wouldn't necessarily perhaps always improvise that way with, these three different voices. But even if you were just using one voice, that voice is going to be more melodically tuned in, and rather than, more sideways than horizontal.
That's the vertical. That's exactly it. Yeah. I'm trying to think about how a line or two lines or three lines navigate the form of a tune, and interact with one another, that isn't just about like checking boxes in terms of like what belongs to that chord, or what do I need to play to articulate that chord. I'm trying to think about something that's much more sort of intuitive, really, even though the thing about music, which we all know, I think, is that at its best it sounds effortless, right? But to get to that point where it sounds effortless, it takes a lot of effort, right?
How would you characterize who is this book for? Who should get this book?
Well, honestly, okay. So it's designed for people who are kind of where I felt I was at a certain point in my life, which is like I've learned the chords, I can play the scales, I can do the arpeggios, I've got patterns that I can play over changes, but it's all just leaving me a little bit cold, right? That was why it was written. But I also believe, like, I don't really know how this works, but I believe that these ideas will help you develop as a player if you introduce them right when you're starting to learn what chords are in the first place. Because what they do, or what they're supposed to do, is remind you that chords are very important, and scales are very important, arpeggios are very important, patterns can be important, but they are not the whole picture, right? Because they are not what a listener is appreciating when they listen to music. They're hearing something else. And I bet that when you first listened to somebody playing the saxophone, that's not what appealed to you either. Like when I got my first saxophone, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? But I would listen to um, Lester Young or Coleman Hawkins on my dad's records, and I would try to play along with it. And 9 times out of 10, the stuff that I was playing didn't make any sense. But occasionally, I'd find something, and it would just make me so happy, right? If your approach to improvisation is that you're going to play stuff that you already know works, then it might sound like it works, but it won't make you happy in that way. Like I found something, right? And that's what I found. I found that when I first started playing the saxophone and I didn't know what I was doing, it made me happier to play the saxophone than it did. Fast forward 10 years, and I can play all these scales and connect them and stuff. I was playing objectively much better, but it didn't make me as happy. And so, what I found by the whole process of like the origins of the ideas that went into this book, I can play stuff that surprises me now in a way that it didn't before, and that's that's always the best part. Like if I play something, let's say I'm at the recording session, and I play something and I'm nailing it, and I'm like, oh man, this is amazing. Like I'm totally taking care of business here. These are really hard changes, and I'm check it out. Now, when it doesn't happen that often, but I'm feeling like that, and then I listen back to the recording. The best case scenario is that I got everything right. Okay, and so my reaction, if I got everything right, is like when I listen to it, I'm like, okay, cool, I got everything right. But in that other situation, when I'm in the recording studio and I'm playing a solo and I'm like, oh, what's happening here? I don't feel 100% comfortable. I'm not totally in control. Okay. I go and listen to that later on. And yes, like I might listen to it and think, oh, that didn't go well. But I might also think, whoa, that was really cool. And that would not have happened if I had just been like in control in that very sort of secure box of the scales and arpeggios.
That reminds me of two profound things. Well, one that comes to mind, and this is from Eric Alexander, who I've spoken with a lot. And while he is a very logical player and he knows all his harmony and all his scales and arpeggios, one thing he said is that I loved is like the best things that I play are my mistakes. And I think it's kind of saying the same thing. It's like when I do something that I wasn't planning to do, that's like my favorite part because it just sounds better because it's not just I played everything right. It's, you know how to do, like, okay, great, I did the job. But when you know how to play everything right, but then maybe you take a new risk, or maybe something completely unexpected happens, like, oh, that was the most interesting thing that happened in that solo.
Yeah.
And
so
the other thing that made me think of was when great players will listen to their recordings that everyone else might be like, oh, it was an amazing solo, and they're just like, just disappointed. And I'm wondering if it's because it was just so predictable, maybe for them, because you've heard yourself play those things many times.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, like there's no way to predict or prepare for the way that anyone else is going to respond to what you're doing. And if you're thinking about that, then you're definitely barking up the wrong tree, right? But all you can really try to do is like keep yourself interested, right? And play something that is meaningful to you and hope that other people follow. And the thing is, I mean, look, it's true. If I sometimes I'll play and I think, man, I'm on fire tonight, this is great. And then nobody says anything to me. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you're supposed to. And then other times I'll be like, oh God, I cannot play this instrument at all. I should throw it straight in the trash. And then people come up to me and be like, wow, that's amazing. And the first thing that you have to do is actually the first lesson that Bob Mintzer, my teacher when I first got to Manhattan School, told me. It was interesting that, this was his choice of thing. It was one of the first things he said was like, when somebody gives you a compliment, take it. Do not respond by telling them that they're wrong about what they heard and that in fact you suck, right? I mean, that's really valuable advice, but sometimes you're just not ready for it, right? But it could be that they've never heard you before and they don't know what you sound like. And frankly, like if there is, zero ability to play, and here is where you are at your best, at your worst, you're like here, right? So, the other people aren't going to notice the things that drive you crazy about your playing. But I don't remember where I was going with that. But in any case, what part of what I was looking for in working on the stuff that ended up in this book is just a way to like take myself on a journey instead of just taking the same path every time. And the thing is about that same path, as I refer to it, is that it can still be fun, right? It can be exhilarating. It can be with the right band. It can feel really good. That's all cool. I don't want to be in a place where I get bored of my playing and I don't know how to not be bored of my playing, because that's a position that so many young saxophone players are in. They've done so much work to learn all the stuff that they have been, advised correctly that they need to learn. But, that that's sort of the beginning and the end of the work, and they've done it. And now that's left them in a place where they just are so bored of their own playing. And it's tragic because there's, we've got so much that we can do, but we always end up doing the same stuff, or we always end up approaching a chord the same way or whatever. And, you need to find a way out of that. This was mine.
Well, it's fantastic. So thank you for sending me the book. I'm going to be working on these things probably for, well, who knows how long, but there's some really challenging exercises in there that force you to think differently, and if for no other reason, just the technique that you can get from practicing that stuff is worth the time and effort put into it. You told me that you started another book.
Yeah, I have, and I imagine it'll come out in another few months or a year or so. But one of the things I mentioned was time, like being confronted, arriving in New York with. You asked me early on about like early experiences. Let me tell you an early experience that really like sort of shook me and kind of made me determined to find a different path. I got to New York, like I said, I could play, I wasn't cocky, but like, I did sort of believe in myself. And I started to play with rhythm sections, excuse me. And I would have this experience where I'm playing a solo and they're, plodding away, doing their thing. Piano players comping nicely, drummers, playing the time, feels good, bass players, all that. And then I would finish my solo and it was almost like the rhythm section would sort of come to life and they'd start to look at each other, and then they'd be like, okay, let's go on an adventure now that he's out of the way, now we can play the real stuff. And that was just the most like inwardly humiliating thing. Basically, I wasn't engaging with them with time in a way that was interesting to them. And also, to some extent, they probably realized that they had to help me out the whole time with time, because otherwise stuff was going to fall apart. And I decided back then in the last century, I was like, I want to be part of the rhythm section. And so I've spent, 20 years trying to work on how to do that and how to integrate that into my playing and make it valuable, within the context of being a saxophone player, because obviously I'm not in the rhythm section, but I want to be able to hang. So I'm putting together my ideas and the stuff that I've worked on and writing a new book.
That's fantastic. So we've got harmony, we've got time. I feel like there needs to be a third. It needs to be, a
Yeah. Not for me.
Well, I don't know. Maybe sound. Maybe I don't know, something else.
Yeah, I mean, sound is obviously like something that saxophone players are correctly like preoccupied with, and it's something that I care about. but it's not something that I feel like there's a sort of very common. I mean, obviously, some people don't have very good sound, and some people have great sound. The people who don't have a good sound, like, really are trying to work on it, and sometimes with gear, sometimes with long tones, like whatever. Sometimes my feeling is that with harmony and time in particular, those are the areas that saxophone players are kind of missing out often without realizing that they're missing out. You know what I mean? Like, they sort of have a sense of themselves. It's like, well, that's sort of it's not really my business, you know.
Mm,
Whereas sound is definitely your business, because it's like that's what happens when
mm,
you play the horn.
yeah.
And I just want people to be able to. I want myself to be able to really engage on that level with rhythm section players and with pianists and guitarists and stuff like that. So those are that. But you know what, Jay? Now you mention it, I'm gonna think about, like, the hat trick, the third in the trilogy.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great stuff. Well, Will, thank you so much for taking the
Hey,
time
thank you.
and sharing all of that with us. Thank you for the book, Sideways, and the great recordings, which I'll be listening to more and more. And when your next book comes out, let me know and we can talk about it.
Will do. Thank you so much, Jay. Great to talk to you.